Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Economic 1016. Today, I will be discussing about monopolies, and I hope that you are well and ready for the new lecture. So let's start. So in this chapter, in chapter 8 of the Beck book, which is a prescribed textbook, you are supposed to read chapter 8, and chapter 8 have both two extremes of the market, which is perfect competition and monopoly. And I have already covered the monopoly, the perfect competition part. Here, I will try to explain to you the pure monopoly and all the structure of a market under monopoly. So by the end of this chapter, you should be able to define what is a monopoly, i.e. pure monopoly, understand why a monopolistic equate marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, and recognize how output compares under monopoly and perfect competition. You should also be able to describe how price discrimination affect a monopoly output and profit. So what are the factors which affect the monopoly pricing power and its profit and the output they do deliver. So we start with the pure monopoly, and then there's a statement here that each Earth environment has a monopoly on life as we know it. So we should learn how to work with the environment rather than constantly changing it. Well, a monopolist is the sole supplier and potential supplier of the industry. Monopolists have pricing power, and a question then is: does a monopoly charge the highest price possible it can? Now, the actual answer there is that no, the monopoly cannot charge the highest price it can. Rather, the objective of a monopoly is not to charge the highest price, but to maximize its profit. So monopoly power implies that a firm has some control over price. And then, so a good example is a monopoly is like coffee, depend on the price, it depends on the barista. It can either be stronger or weak. So the degree of the monopoly power depends on the firm elasticity of demand. So the demand, always remember that if when you let demand and supply and you let elasticities, those elasticities actually affect the amount supplied and demanded in the market. So even for a monopoly, elasticity of demand is very important when deciding how much output and how to price the good they produce. The key to monopoly power is one is significant barrier to entry, and those barriers to entry can take different form. One, it can be economic of scales. So when in companies say to have economic of scale when average costs decline as output increases. So natural monopoly, for example, microprocessors like Intel and electricity utilities like ESCOM and Engen and stuff. They and local newspapers. I'm not sure about local newspapers, but a lot of companies which have total cost declining as output increases tend to have to be natural monopoly. So just know that for a natural monopoly, you actually have your average cost decreasing or your marginal cost and average cost are merely constant. When you have that scenario, we say those firms are natural monopolies. So control of a significant factor of production. So you could find that the firm is the only have control of a significant factor of production. Through the control of an important input, a firm can keep potential rivals out of the market. So you find that the sole supplier of one highly demanded commodity or highly demanded import, then you can actually output, then you can actually keep everybody else out of the market. If you talk about input, then that will be a monopsony and not a monopoly. Monopsony, you are the sole buyer of the input. Government franchise, patent, and copyright. This market barrier to entry extend from legal government mandate. So you find that things like a post office and a train line, often government give a company the right to build a railway or a train line of post office. So you find that there is only one post office. There are not many post office. So the competition there, even though government is now trying to reduce the power post office have by allowing all this as a form of competitors to come in the industry. So regulated monopolies type. So a government franchise grant a firm permission to provide a specific good or service while prohibiting others from doing so, thereby eliminating potential competitors. So find that a government give companies a right to do something, and then we can only have one operator. So in that form, we see that it's a government as a government franchise granted power, right? Then there are patents. So of course, to increase innovation and to increase productivity for a country, you kind of want government to be granting a patent. Now, how does government grant patent? When somebody files for a patent, if the patent is really useful, the person should be able to benefit from its invention. So patents are extended to firms and individuals who invent new products and processes for a limited period over 20 years. So IBM, for example, is a leading patent company in the world. So they have so many patents. They nearly over 20 years, they have been leading in being granted patents because they're just very innovative. So they do enjoy it. For a limited period okay, so the patent holder is legally protected from competition during the period. Objective of patent give individuals a firm and incentive to invent and innovate. In a similar vein, copyright give individuals or firms the exclusive right to produce or reproduce certain type of intellectual property for an extended period. Example, a book, a piece of art, a piece of software code, all can be copyrighted, right? So Coca-Cola as well, the ingredient and the Coca-Cola must have a patent on the production of the soft drink, which called Coca-Cola. Probably my notes are copyrighted as well. I haven't copyrighted this. This is free. I'm just building on the shoulders of the giant. As with any monopoly, the jury has the right to judge both the law as well as the fact in controversy. So John Jay said this, meaning a monopoly determines both its output level and per unit price. So profit maximizing output for a monopoly then, so to maximize profit, a firm chooses the output at which marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, or short-run marginal cost in the short run and long-run marginal cost in the long run. It then checks if it covers the average cost. So the firm as well still have to check whether it's covering the average cost in the short run and the long run, and the long run average cost in the long run. So in a perfect competition market, remember that price was equal to marginal revenue. In contrast, a monopoly demand curve is the industry demand curve, which slopes downward. Downward sloping demand curve, price and marginal revenue and total revenue are related for a monopoly. The more inelastic the demand curve, the more an extra unit of output beat down the price, reducing revenue from existing units. So marginal revenue is negative, so further expansion reduces total revenue, right? So you see that marginal price a monopoly set is actually higher than the marginal revenue, i.e. marginal revenue is less than the price a monopoly charges. The monopoly has the usual cost curve, average and marginal in both long run and the short run. So the firm decision under the monopoly, so if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, the monopoly decision is on about output is to raise output. When marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, there is where they should produce to maximize profit. Marginal revenue less than marginal cost, they lower the output, and for short run price greater than short run average cost, they produce. Right, so the monopoly equilibrium. So this is a graph which just depicts how a monopoly equilibrium look like. And it's nothing else, but it's merely showing you that, so the monopoly then will find where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, which is this point. And then it will charge a price on the demand curve, which is P1. Now, how much profit does the monopoly make? The monopoly will make a profit, which is equivalent. So you remember that profit is price, is quantity times bracket price minus average total cost, which is, so this area is what a monopoly is, the monopoly profit. So this is what a monopoly profit will be. And this area, this triangle, the triangle from P1, A1 up to here, that is your consumer surplus. So the consumer surplus is being eroded. And this small triangle here, this one here is showing the deadweight loss. So just remember that. So the monopoly find a point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, lies below the demand, the downward sloping demand curve. The monopoly then chooses the output Q1, as I illustrated above. To find the price at which Q1 is sold, we look at the demand curve at P1. Profit per unit is given by P1 minus AC times Q1. Marginal revenue is less than P for a monopoly. You should have not noticed that marginal revenue is here and the price is there. So marginal revenue is less than the price. Right. Always contrast this with the perfect competition. By implication, the marginal revenue curve is always plotted below the demand curve for a monopoly. In contrast, the perfect competition firm, which price and marginal revenue are always the same. Right. So again, I did, okay, so you can maximize this to try to see different type of markets. And different type of market, what we mean here is that for a perfect competition, you have that there are many buyers, they sell homogeneous product, no barriers to market entry and exit, no long run economic profit, and no control over price. So that is a perfect monopoly. Then it's followed by monopolistic competition where there are many buyers and sellers. They do sell differentiated product, for example, Johnson & Johnson and Johnson & Johnson and for example, other medical companies, they sell differentiated product. No barriers to market entry and exit, no long run economic profit as well, and some control over price in the short run. Right, oligopoly, fewer firms, mutually independent decisions, substantial barriers to market entry or exit, potential for long run economic profit, share market power and considered control over price. Right, then a monopoly then, for a monopoly, there is one firm, no close substitute for a product, nearly insuperable barriers to entry, and then potential for long-run economic profit, substantial market power, and control over price. So those are things you need to remember as we continue in this chapter, right? What prevents you from establishing a mail service? The legal barriers to entry prevent you. Even if you are on the right track, so of course, legal barriers actually prevent you from starting a monopoly. Even if you are on the right track, you will get run over if you sit there. So this is important that a firm only has the opportunity to earn a pure profit in the short run. Monopoly does not guarantee economic profit. So remember that being a monopoly doesn't mean you are profitable. ESCOM is some form of a monopoly, but you know what's happening in this country about ESCOM. Remember that competitive firms may or may not be profitable in the short run, but in the long run, they must earn at least a normal profit to remain in business. This is also true for monopolists. So in the case of a monopoly, when price is lower than average total cost, they suffer a loss. But if the price exceeds average variable cost, the monopolist will minimize its loss in the short run by continuing to produce. If the price should fall below average variable cost, the monopoly, just like any other competitive firm, will minimize its loss by shutting down its plant. If the loss persists, the monopoly will exit the industry in the long run. This is an important point to remember. Being in a monopoly does not automatically mean there will be monopoly profit. Remember the contrast. Monopoly causes a deadweight loss known as the welfare loss to society from a monopoly market. Monopolies, so apart from perfect competition, which I have already told you in the previous lecture that is actually production efficiency and allocative efficiency, all these other form of markets, apart from perfect competition, they do cause a deadweight loss. And you need to keep that in mind. That's a very unique example of which there's a deadweight loss. The only time there's no deadweight loss under monopoly is when they can perfectly price discriminate. That is a very important phenomenon you need to remember. Monopoly earn economic profit by charging more and producing less than competitive firm. So there is rent seeking. Rent seeking, directly avoiding competition. There's resource expected to protect a monopoly. Resources are expended to protect a monopoly position. These are useful for such activities as lobbying, extended patent, and restriction the number of license permits. So this is like a John D. Rockefeller behavior of whatever 17th centuries, where anyone who tried to compete with you, you spend your capital, you buy them out and shut that company down, so there's no competition. Microsoft versus Google in 1980, Google versus the European Higher Commission, that's of the latest, where, and actually even today, rent seeking behavior is actually very prevalent. Facebook bought WhatsApp and bought Oculus Rift. all that, and Instagram. That's all just to try to make sure that you tame all the competition which are likely to threaten your monopoly in media and advertisement. Google bought over 150 companies, Amazon over 200 companies just last year. So you can imagine that they are trying to acquire all these companies which are likely to threaten them, but they buy them under the umbrella that it helps them to innovate, but actually it's just try to make sure there is no competition which is threatening them. Right, so we have a thing called X inefficiency in economics, and that is protected from competitive pressure. Pressures. Monopolies do not have to act efficiently. So X inefficiency results from it, because if you don't have any competitors, you can actually be very inefficient. So you could, thus spending on corporate jet, travel, and other perks of business represent X inefficiency. So will taxing a monopoly remove its power? No, actually, a monopoly will still have control over its output price, despite of the price. Later, you see that when a monopoly is regulated, they set a price equal to average cost, and you will see that in our quizzes. Right, price discrimination. So so ACP Go in 1920s identified 3 categories of price discrimination. So you can do a price discrimination. Remember, price you could get in a flight sometime, and you actually pay different price to the guy you sat next to, right? So how is that possible? Those are the type of price discrimination which can persist. So we have 3 types of price discrimination, and you could read extensively in your book, in your book and online, what are the price discrimination and what do they mean. So a first-degree price discrimination involves charging every customer the maximum amount they are willing to pay for each unit of product sold. This removes all consumer surplus, that is the usual excess of value that people get from buying multiple units of goods at a fixed price. In theory, if perfectly carried out, first-degree price discrimination will generate no deadweight loss, as I explained earlier. First-degree price discrimination can only be roughly approximated and only occur in specialized circumstances. So it's actually very hard to achieve that. Second-degree price discrimination is the practice of setting 2 or more price for a good, depending on the amount purchased. The most familiar variant in the is the 2-part tariff, where there is an entrance fee into the market, followed by a single price for all units purchased. So you'll see that if you go to a place like Disney World, you could pay the entrance fee, but there are some part of a theme park where you still have to pay again to enjoy the benefit of being there. And that is what we call 2-part price discrimination. So the entry fee, or if you go to Gold Reef City in South Africa, you find that there is an entry fee, and then there is another amount you have to pay to be able to see things. So actually, even if you go to Lions Park, I think down Johannesburg somewhere in South, you'll see that they do have an entry fee, and then they have another fee where you have to pay to go see lion feeding or whatever. So they have all this different form of price discrimination. Right, a 2 or multi-pricing is often used to increase output in a regulated monopoly while allowing total costs to be covered by total revenue. Buyers typically do not all face the same price for marginal purchase and the second-degree price discrimination. However, and this generates allocative inefficiency. For example, if there are 2 or more prices, one for an initial set of units and the lower charges for succeeding flow, not everyone has sufficient demand to get past this higher price range. So you see that if there was a way of discriminating to find that if you don't reach that price, then you can't actually participate, even though you are willing to pay something within the pack to participate. You will be very happy to pay a 50 Rand entry fee to go see something in the pack. But if the entry fee is 100 Rand and there is something inside which is 50 Rand, you might need to see something for 50 Rand, but you can't pay the 100 Rand to enter in first. So that's kind of a deadweight loss. Additionally, increasing rightward demand curve are likely to confront successive lower prices, implying that not everyone had just purchased the same marginal price. As a result, goods are not allocated to their higher value user. In the third-degree price discrimination, a seller identifies separate market segment, each of which possesses its own demand for its products. So students versus pensioners, pensioners are very sensitive to prices, while students are not necessarily very sensitive to prices change. So you could actually discriminate by charging elder people versus young people totally different prices. Joe and Robinson demonstrate that a monopolist output remain constant with linear demand curve, whether or not the monopolist price discriminate. Further, she noted that under third price discrimination, output is misallocated in comparison to sales at a single monopoly price. The latter is superior in welfare terms. The most widely accepted benchmark for antitrust, at least for none, so antitrust is laws which are formulated to make sure that monopolies do not perform rent seeking. So if you go to Google and you read about Google case versus the European Commission antitrust law case, you see that Google was trying to price discriminate by giving preference on certain ads, which actually are harmful, because if you see an ad, if Google rank an ad as a top product, while it is actually not the top product, but because only that company is paying Google to do so, it means you could get a worse product, inferior product to the superior product, because Google have chosen that. So that's actually, you kind of want an antitrust laws to make sure they can't do that. A deadweight loss results in a situation in which prices and marginal costs are not equal. Firm with monopoly power price discriminate. So this is a summary, so I am not going to discuss this. You should read it again and remember. At my lemonade stand, I used to give the first glass away for free and charge the maximum willingness to pay for the second glass. The refilling contained the antidote. So this is like explaining some form of a price discrimination. Again, before I move to an example, I always like to use calculus to show you some useful concepts which are important in the topic we covered. Properties of marginal revenue. In this chapter, you need to understand how to derive the marginal revenue for a downward sloping demand curve. That is total revenue, differentiate with respect to Q, you should get your marginal revenue. Right, so I see that there's a typo here. This should have been a total revenue. So total revenue is equal to price times quantity and the price elasticity. We show this below as follows. So marginal revenue, you are differentiating this, which is price times quantity, and you should get that. So this is a product rule because this is a function, price is a function of output. So dP dQ times Q, and then when you differentiate with respect to Q, you get this. Now when you take price out, you're left with 1 Q over P dP dQ. Notice that this is elasticity inverted. So if you invert this, you get a dQ dP times P over Q, that's elasticity. So I can write this as 1 plus 1 over elasticity. But remember that elasticity of demand is negative, so this should be negative. Recall that elasticity of demand is given by this, so, and it should be negative, right? From equation 1 above, recall that demand curve is downward sloping, so elasticity should be negative. To make this fact explicit, we might need to rewrite equation 1 as follows. So we write this as marginal revenue is equal to price 1 minus this. Now, so what does this mean? It means that if elasticity is actually greater than 1, meaning elastic, demand is elastic, and marginal revenue is increasing, a monopoly will be producing. If demand is unit elastic, demand is, if elasticity is 1, demand is unit elastic, and marginal revenue is 0. So demand is inelastic and marginal revenue is less than 0. It means that a monopoly will never produce at any inelastic demand curve. Then we have something we call it a Lerner index. And the Lerner index is nothing else, but it's you needing to remember that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. A monopoly will set where price is equal, will maximize its profit where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So you can actually replace marginal revenue with marginal cost and solve for, and as I did here. And then if you actually now divide by P and take minus there, you can get that. So it means that price minus marginal cost over price is equal to 1 over elasticity. So what does that mean? It means that if you increase marginal, if this thing was perfect elastic, it means this thing is 0, which means P is equal to MC. Recall that the optimal point, MR equal to MC, so we can equate the right-hand side of equation 2 with equation 1. So I was just explaining how this come about. The left-hand side is known as the Lerner index, which is the measure of the monopoly power of FM. So this is very important. Sometimes you are given only prices and you are told to calculate elasticity. You are given price and marginal cost and you are told to calculate elasticity. you should be able to do the manipulation to get the marginal, to get the elasticity. So watch out on that. If marginal cost is equal to 0 and price is infinity, then the linear index is 1, which is a maximum value. For a monopoly, it lies between 0 and 1 and rises as demand becomes less elastic. Okay. Finally, I set up an example for you to be able to check. So a monopoly faces a market demand curve given by Q is equal to 70 minus P. If a monopoly can produce at a constant average cost and marginal cost, AC is equal to MC is equal to 6, what output level will the monopoly choose in order to maximize profit? What is the price at which at this output level? What are the monopoly profit? Assuming instead that the monopoly has a cost structure where cost is described by this, and with the monopoly facing the same market demand and marginal revenue as before, what quantity will the monopoly now produce and maximize profit? What will the monopoly charges? What will the monopoly profit be? Right. Assume that third cost structure. So you're given the third cost structure is this. What is the quantity monopoly now produce to maximize profit? Okay, so the same type of question, and you need to graph all of them and show how different they are, right? And part E is what can you say about the profit-making ability of a monopoly? So solution. So monopoly facing a demand curve like this. So all you need to do is recall that a monopoly maximizes profit by setting marginal revenues equal to marginal cost. And from above, we have the demand, that one. So we can derive in terms of P and calculate our our total revenue, which is this. Then if this is our total revenue, we can differentiate this to get that marginal revenue is that. Now we set marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. We know that we are given marginal cost to be 6. So it means quantity is 32. You substitute 32 into the price function to get that the price they're going to set is what? It's 38 under the scenario. What are the monopoly profit? Recall that profit is given by this, P minus AC. From the above, we have Q, P, and AC. So we just substitute P. So Q is 32, we calculated P 38, and ATC is 6, so we get that. Assuming instead, so when you change this, merely you do the same thing. The only thing which is changing now is that you already know what is our revenue, what's our marginal revenue. What you need to do now is to differentiate this to get your marginal revenue because it's changing. So this becomes 0.5 minus 5, Q minus 5, which is here. Then you equate them and solve to get Q is equal to 30, and you substitute this 30 into the price to get price to be 40. What will the monopoly profit be? You do it again, you get that. Now, for a monopoly in this time, you needed to calculate average total cost, which is just taking your cost function and divide by Q and substitute that Q to get that. Then you get this value. Similarly, for this, you do the same thing, and I encourage you to do part C yourself and make sure that you get the answers as I got here. Then you graph them, it should look like this. So this is actually a natural monopoly because it has a constant marginal cost and average cost. This one is not a natural monopoly, and this is how it should look like. And the last one should look like this, right? The last question, what can you say about the profit-making ability of the monopoly? A monopoly profit-making ability is constrained by two things. One, the market demand curve it faces, along with its associated marginal revenue curve. And second, the cost structure under its production. Surely, you should notice that the profit did decline, is declining depending on the type of the function the monopoly is having. Thank you very much for watching this, and I hope that you understand this. Okay, thanks a lot. Next time, we will meet to discuss other parts. Thanks.